Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Peachy from your WCA Astronomy class, and I'm doing this little tutorial lesson just because of the schedule this year. We do not have a class on, let's see, it would be the second week of April, so I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to go through the life cycle of stars because it's pretty important and it's going to really enable you to understand kind of the content from here on out. So we're just going to give you a quick mini lesson on the life cycle of stars. All right, so our star, the sun, is considered to be a middle-aged, kind of medium-sized star. Relatively low mass, but definitely not the lowest in mass, and about middle of the road temperature-wise, and really just pretty average in general. When you look at stars, stars range from very small to very large, and they also range in age as well, from baby stars, even stars that are kind of fetal stars, if you want to consider them that, before they're even born, to stars that have died, and kind of look at that life cycle here as well. Okay, so this image that I have here on the screen, this is representing the life cycle of stars, kind of comparing it to the life cycle of people. Now keep in mind that stars aren't living, but they do have a beginning and an end, much like a life cycle. So that's why we use it as an analogy here. So when we look at the star fetus, which is before a star actually begins to be a star, that is what we call a protostar. And as the star heats up, nuclear fusion occurs. And we call this like basically the infancy through adulthood of that star. That's what's called the main sequence. So basically it's before the star begins to go through the dying process. Okay, and think of when you become middle-aged, I guess that's me at this point, you are going to start to go through this aging and dying process that takes a lot of time, especially if you don't die from other means beforehand. So middle-aged star is a red giant or a red supergiant star, and as the star dwindles to old age and death, it becomes a white dwarf, a black dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole, kind of depending upon the mass of the star and whether or not it's considered old age or death. Okay, so let's look at what this kind of means here. First of all, let's kind of revisit the idea of a protostar, and I'm going to kind of skip ahead just a minute here. Where the heck am I? My eyes are adjusting to this bright light. So protostars are stars before they've actually undergone nuclear fusion in their cores. So stars are going to form from the accumulation and coalescence, so sticking together, coming together, and cohesion of gas that are found in these things called nebula. Here is an example of a nebula in I think this is in Sagittarius, isn't it? And then this one's another nebula, and essentially these are remains from ancient stars that have already died. So it's kind of a recycling of sorts. So because everything that's made of matter has gravity, the mutual gravity kind of pulls these things together, and eventually over time becomes more and more dense, more and more massive. And the temperature at the core becomes greater and greater because of the property of gases. We know that if we increase pressure, temperature increases as well. That's one of the gas laws. Okay, so the core of these stars are increasing in temperature until they reach a critical temperature of about 10 million degrees Celsius, where nuclear fusion takes place. So here we have some evidence, some pictures showing one of these protoplanetary disks. This is a protostar at the center, and the disk of accreted matter around it will become a solar system at some point in the future. And you can see here the protostar and protoplanets. It continues until nuclear fusion occurs at the core of the star. The protostar. When that happens, it starts to produce its own heat and light, not just because of the pressure, but because of the process of fusion. This is a nuclear reaction, much like what we see in power plants that produce energy to power homes, only instead of fission, this is fusion. So you've got hydrogen atoms that are going to combine to form heavier helium atoms and produce energy as a result. What happens is a huge amount of energy is just emitted from that star at both axes. This is a jet of energy that comes outwards. It blows a lot of that excess gas and dust away from that protoplanetary disk. And then where other chunks of gas have kind of collected and formed these larger protoplanets, those will stay in orbit around the parent star. Now, some of the things you want to know when it comes to stars is that they're going to vary in temperature and they're going to vary in color as a result of temperature. So stars have different colors. Blue is the hottest stars, and in this picture here you can see a bunch of blue dots because those stars are going to be bigger and hotter. Green are yellow are going to be middle colored stars, and then red are your cooler stars. It doesn't necessarily mean they're the smallest, but they're the coolest in temperature. So when you look at the spectrum here, and this is called the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, which we'll talk about a little bit later, this main line here is the main sequence. Remember that this is the time of infancy through adulthood for the stars. So rather than representing a place, this line represents a time period. This is the time that the star is just doing its business, being a child, being an adolescent, being an adult, has not started dying yet, okay? Once it moves off that main sequence, it is now in the dying process. Red giant stars are older or middle-aged stars, whereas white dwarf stars down here are dead and dying stars. Do you understand that? So this is representing more of a time sequence than it is a spatial sequence. I want you to make sure you understand that part of it. Within the core of stars, you see they can reach anywhere from 10 to 20-some million degrees Celsius, right? And so it is that heat, extreme heat and temperature, which brings those hydrogen atoms close enough together to overcome that strong nuclear force and force those nuclei to bond. So now instead of having a nucleus that has only one proton, you have a nucleus with 2 protons. That's helium. And that process releases an incredible amount of energy. And you have to imagine that there are just billions and billions of these atoms going through that process at the same time. So they're all releasing this energy, which we see as light and we feel as heat. We see the effects of it in ultraviolet radiation, and X-rays and gamma rays, and all sorts of stuff that's emitted from these stars. There is a process going on in stars that keeps that star in balance. You've got this huge kind of explosive thing happening inside the core of the star. We call that, this atomic energy pushing outwards. But you've got gravity pulling it inwards, which is balancing that outward push. So this balance between the outward explosive quality of the core and the inward pull of gravity, we call this balance hydrostatic equilibrium. That is going to determine what happens to the star. As long as hydrostatic equilibrium is maintained, that star kind of just stays there doing its thing. But if more energy is released in the core and it becomes more energetic, more energy than gravity, the star expands. If gravity becomes greater than the energy, which remember gravity is not going to increase, but what can happen is the nuclear reactions can slow down and you'll have less energy inside. So if there's less energy inside and therefore gravity is greater, it's going to shrink. So we have to look at the balance between the nuclear explosive energy in the core and the gravitational energy pulling that star and holding it together. That's very important. We have many examples of where stars are born. This is a cluster you can see in the night sky. It's called the Pleiades. It is an open star cluster, and it is visible kind of right above the constellation Taurus in the night sky. It's very small to the naked eye, but it is easily seen. And it is actually a group of stars that were formed together in space, which is pretty cool. Now, once a star begins to fuse, it can really become a multiple different types of stars. Look at all these different spectral classes we have here. A star that is very, very massive, so has lots and lots of stuff, is up here in the bluer category. So they're blue to dark blue to light blue. They have high temperatures, good large amounts of mass. Because the temperatures at the core are so hot, they're going to be busily just burning and burning and burning through that hydrogen fuel, right? Fusion is taking place super rapidly. Down here, the red stars, they're a lot cooler at the core, so fusion's still taking place, but it's more of a gradual burn. So what you see is these guys here, they have very, very energetic but short lifespans. These are much less energetic but longer lifespans. So our darkest blue stars can live about 100,000 years before they die. The red stars here can live about 100 billion years before they die. That's a huge difference, right? So you have to kind of keep that into consideration. We are spectral class G, so we live about somewhere in the middle, about 5 billion years. So that's about I lied, about 10 billion years. That's about the lifespan of a class G star. We are currently at about 5, so we're about halfway through our lifespan. There's a lot of stuff here, guys. All right, I just wanted to kind of to go through here. We'll just go through the life cycle in short, and then I may have to do a couple more broadcasts here, one of low mass stars in general and one of high mass stars in general, because I think it's just going to be too much information to include in a single podcast. But when you look at the life cycle of stars, it is highly contingent upon how big that star is. A massive star, no, remember, we're talking mass, not volume. So a massive star who's burning that fuel so fast is going to have a much shorter lifespan. It's also going to have a lot more energy at the core, which means that, remember, that hydrostatic equilibrium, which is balancing and keeping that size of the star in check, when you increase the amount of energy at the core of that star, that could have explosive results for a large mass star. So large mass stars end in what are known as supernova explosions. On the other hand, smaller stars like our sun are not as energetic at the core. That means when they're expanding and contracting and going through these throes of death at the end of their lives, they will not have such a dramatic ending. They end as a planetary nebula, which ends up becoming a white and black dwarf over time. Now, it'll have to be in the next 2 podcasts that I talk about the life cycle specifically of low mass stars will be the next one, and then high mass stars will be the one that follows, because there just won't be enough time within this first 15 minutes to cover that. But we did cover the basics of what powers a star, protostars, hydrostatic equilibrium, and you now understand that there are multiple types of stars, both low mass and high mass stars, that have exceptionally different lengths of life depending on the mass of the star and therefore the energy at which it fuses. Hopefully you learned something today, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me a webmail or call me at extension 2204. Have a great day.